Hey there, Marvelous viewers! How can anyone forget the days when the Lethal Weapon movies made buddy cop action feel larger than life? For fans of the franchise, the idea of a fifth Lethal Weapon movie isn't just another sequel update. It feels like the possible final ride of one of Hollywood's most iconic action duos, Mel Gibson's Martin Riggs and Danny Glover's Roger Murtaugh, helped define the buddy cop formula for an entire generation, mixing shootouts, car chases, trauma, family drama, and comedy in a way that still echoes through action cinema today. But here's the important part. Lethal Weapon 5 has been discussed for years, and while Mel Gibson has publicly said that he intends to direct it, the movie still doesn't have an official release date, confirmed shooting schedule, or final public plot synopsis as of now. So instead of treating this like a guaranteed movie arriving tomorrow, we're going to break down exactly what's confirmed, what's been reported, and what remains uncertain, and why fans are still hoping to see Riggs and Murtaugh return one last time. In this video, we're going to talk about everything we know so far about Lethal Weapon 5. Lethal Weapon, why this movie still matters. Have you grown up watching buddy cop movies like Rush Hour, Bad Boys, or Beverly Hills Cop? If yes, then you've definitely felt the shadow of Lethal Weapon somewhere in that formula. The first Lethal Weapon arrived in 1987 and starred Mel Gibson as Martin Riggs and Danny Glover as Roger Murtaugh. It's not just another cop movie. It took the opposites forced to work together setup and gave it a sharper emotional edge. Riggs was reckless, wounded, and self-destructive after the death of his wife, and Murtaugh was older, more grounded, and trying to survive both police work and family life. Their partnership slowly turned into one of the most beloved bromances in action cinema. The original film was also a major commercial success. Box Office Mojo lists its domestic gross at about $65.2 million, and worldwide gross at about $120.2 million, while the numbers lists a very similar worldwide total of about $120.1 million. This is a strong result for an R-rated action film from the late 80s, and it helped launch a franchise that ran across 4 theatrical movies from 1987 to 1998. Credit also has to go to the creative forces behind it. Richard Donner directed the film, and Shane Black wrote the screenplay. Donner was already known for films like Superman the Movie and The Omen, while Shane Black's writing helped shape the wisecracking, dangerous, Christmas-adjacent action style that later became part of his signature. And of course, the oxygen of the franchise was always the chemistry between Gibson and Glover. Riggs and Murtaugh worked because they were funny, damaged, loyal, and constantly testing each other's patience. You believe they could get each other killed, but you also believe they would die for each other. That's why the idea of a fifth movie still has emotional weight. It's not just nostalgia, it's the possibility of seeing 2 legendary characters face age, legacy, and one final case after decades away from the big screen. The franchise also reached television between 2016 and 2019, when Fox aired a Lethal Weapon TV series starring Clayne Crawford as Riggs and Damon Wayans as Murtaugh. However, that show was a rebooted television adaptation, not a direct prequel to the original film continuity. So whatever happened in the TV version shouldn't be treated as a direct setup for the 5th movie. Before we talk about the new film's status, let us quickly remember where the theatrical story last ended.
Go.
The original Lethal Weapon introduced Martin Riggs as a deeply unstable LAPD detective grieving the death of his wife Victoria. His pain made him dangerous, fearless, and unpredictable, which is why the title Lethal Weapon fits him so perfectly. Roger Murtaugh, meanwhile, was the family man who famously felt he was getting too old for this kind of chaos. Their partnership began with tension, suspicion, and frustration, but over time, it became the emotional spine of the franchise. Across the sequels, Riggs became less isolated, Murtaugh's family became more central, and the film slowly shifted from pure action thriller energy into a more comedic family-driven action saga. By Lethal Weapon 4 in 1998, the series was openly dealing with aging, family, fatherhood, and legacy. Riggs was in a relationship with Lorna Cole, played by Rene Russo, and by the end of the film, they had a child together. Murtaugh's family also expanded, with his daughter Rianne involved with Detective Lee Butters, played by Chris Rock. That ending gave the franchise a surprisingly warm sense of closure. It was not a dark cliffhanger. It was more like a family photo after years of bullets, explosions, and near-death disasters. That's why any 5th movie has to be careful. It can't just bring Riggs and Murtaugh back for empty nostalgia. It has to justify reopening a story that already had a fairly complete emotional ending. The most logical direction is one final case that forces them to confront age, mortality, and whether men like Riggs and Murtaugh still have a place in a changed world. But at this stage, that remains speculation. No official plot synopsis has been released. Mel Gibson, killing two birds with one stone? Yes, you heard it right. Mel Gibson is expected to return as Martin Riggs, and he has also publicly said that he will direct the fifth movie. This is one of the most interesting parts of the whole project. Richard Donner directed all 4 previous Lethal Weapon films, so a fifth movie without him already feels emotionally different. Donner passed away in 2021, and Gibson has said that Donner had asked him to carry the flag forward if he could not make the movie himself. Gibson has described Donner as a close friend and mentor, and he said that Donner had already gone a fair way with the screenplay before his death. According to Gibson, the team used what Donner had developed and continued working on it. That matters because it suggests the movie is not simply a studio reboot with the old title slapped on it. At least creatively, it appears to be tied to Donner's own desire to put the franchise to bed. Gibson is also not an actor randomly stepping behind a camera for the first time. As a director, he made films like Braveheart, The Passion of the Christ, Apocalypto, Hacksaw Ridge, and Flight Risk. Whether people debate his personal controversies or not, his directorial experience is real, and he's handled large-scale violence, emotion, and intense physical storytelling before. That could make him an interesting fit for Lethal Weapon 5, especially if the movie really does balance action, humor, and heavier emotional themes. Gibson has previously indicated that the script deals with harder material while still keeping the comedy alive. However, we have to be very careful here. Gibson saying he intends to direct the movie is not the same thing as the movie being fully dated, shot, or ready for theaters. The project has been alive in development for years, but development is not the same as production. So the safest statement is this: Mel Gibson has publicly confirmed that he's attached to direct Lethal Weapon 5, but the film still has no official release date or a confirmed production start as of now. Is Danny Glover returning? This is the question every fan wants answered. Is Danny Glover coming back as Roger Murtaugh? The honest answer is that Danny Glover has long been associated with the project, and early reports over the years have discussed the idea of Gibson and Glover returning together. Richard Donner himself also wanted the fifth film to be the final chapter for the original duo, but as of now, there's not been a fresh studio-issued final cast announcement locking every returning actor into place for a completed production. That means we shouldn't overstate it by saying Danny Glover is officially confirmed and the movie is definitely coming soon. A safer, more accurate way to say this is the entire emotional purpose of Lethal Weapon 5 depends on Gibson and Glover returning as Riggs and Murtaugh, and the project has repeatedly been discussed as a final ride for that original pairing. And honestly, without Glover, it would barely feel like Lethal Weapon. Roger Murtaugh is not a sidekick, he's half the engine. His patience, fear, family life, frustration, and the iconic line, "I'm too old for this," are part of the franchise's DNA. In a fifth movie, that line would hit differently. Back in the 1980s and 90s, it was a funny complaint from a tired cop. Now, decades later, it could become the emotional truth of the entire story. If the movie happens, age cannot just be a joke, it has to be the point. That's why fans are so invested in seeing both Riggs and Murtaugh together again. The action can be updated, the case can be new, the villains can change, but the soul of Lethal Weapon is still those two men arguing, surviving, and somehow becoming family again. Speculations about the plot. Before discussing the plot possibilities, it's essential to note that everything beyond the broad final chapter idea is still speculation. No official plot synopsis has been released. The most reasonable explanation is that the film would revolve around one final case that pulls Riggs and Murtaugh back into danger. Considering where Lethal Weapon 4 ended, the fifth movie would probably need to explore aging, family, legacy, and whether their old-school methods still work in a modern world. This could be a very powerful angle if handled properly. Riggs is no longer the young, reckless wildcard who doesn't care if he lives or dies. Murtaugh is no longer just a stressed family man counting the days to retirement. These characters would now be men who have survived decades of violence, grief, friendship, and change. The fifth film could ask a simple but emotional question. What does a lethal weapon become when he's no longer young, no longer invincible, and no longer sure the world needs him? That's the version of the movie fans would probably respond to. Not a soft reboot, not a random legacy sequel packed with callbacks, but a final story about two old partners confronting the past and trying to close one last case without losing what remains of their family. Still, until Warner Brothers, New Line, Gibson, or the producers release an official synopsis, the plot remains unconfirmed. Delays and setbacks. The road to Lethal Weapon 5 has been long, messy, and uncertain. The biggest emotional setback was Richard Donner's death in 2021. Donner was not just a hired director, he was the filmmaker behind all 4 original movies, and his involvement gave the proposed 5th film a sense of continuity. Before his death, he had spoken about wanting the 5th movie to be the final one. After he passed away, Gibson stepped forward and said Donner had asked him to carry it home. Another major issue had been the long development process. Scripts have reportedly gone through multiple stages and revisions over the years. At different points, names like Channing Gibson, Richard Wank, and Jez Butterworth have been connected to versions or revisions of the screenplay. That tells us the project has been active, but it also has not been easy to lock down. Gibson has also pointed to studio-side complications, including the Warner Brothers Discovery shakeup as part of the reason the movie stalled. That makes sense because major corporate restructuring can affect budgets, priorities, release strategies, and whether older franchise projects move forward quickly or sit in limbo. By 2025 and 2026, another factor became even clearer. Gibson's focus has been heavily occupied by The Resurrection of the Christ, his sequel to The Passion of the Christ. That project has now completed filming and is planned as a two-part release, with Part 1 dated for May 6, 2027, and Part 2 dated for May 25, 2028. Because of that, it's understandable why Lethal Weapon 5 might not be moving at full speed right now. Director Alan Ungar, who worked with Gibson on Bandit, also suggested in interviews that Gibson still had a plan for Lethal Weapon 5, but that his immediate focus was on the Passion of the Christ sequel. That's not a cancellation, but it is definitely not a green light with cameras rolling either. So the cleanest status is this: Lethal Weapon 5 is still a project Gibson has talked about seriously, but it remains stuck in uncertainty until official production movement is announced. Release date. Now let's talk about the release date, because this is where fans have to be very careful. There is no official release date for Lethal Weapon 5 as of now. There's also no confirmed shooting schedule. Any poster, trailer, or online claims saying Lethal Weapon 5 is definitely releasing in 2026 should be treated with caution unless it comes directly from the studio or a major verified trade outlet. The reason is simple. A movie can be in development for years without entering production. Until filming begins, a release date is announced, and the studio starts officially promoting it, nothing is guaranteed. At the moment, the most accurate update is that Mel Gibson remains attached to direct. Richard Donner's earlier work on the screenplay remains part of the project's legacy, and the film is still discussed as a possible final chapter. But the actual release window is unknown. That may disappoint fans, but it's better than spreading false hype. Lethal Weapon 5 is not dead on arrival, but it's also not a locked-in theatrical event yet. That's it for today, guys. Lethal Weapon 5 remains one of those legacy sequels that fans genuinely want to believe in. But the truth is more complicated than a simple, "it's coming soon." Mel Gibson has talked about directing it, Richard Donner wanted the franchise to have a final chapter, but until an official release date, shooting schedule, and final cast announcement arrive, we should treat it as a promising but uncertain project. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like and share it with your friends. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to never miss any updates. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye!